So let's just jump right into it. Tell me a little bit about your upbringing, where you were born, where you grew up, who your parents were, etc.
Sure. Well, I claim to be a Texan because my biological father was born and raised in Houston, Texas.
Okay.
And then my stepfather was also born and raised in Waco, Texas, both military. So my father, during the Korean War, after the Korean War, went to Japan, was stationed there. He was what was called an underwater demolition frogman, which they later became known as Navy SEALs, which he was a part of the crossover during the Vietnam War. And so I was born in Japan at a naval military base. My mother was Japanese. So when people see me sometimes, you'll love this. When I go to international airports, they look at my passport, see my last name, which is not Asian, and they look at me and look at my picture, and I say, I know. My mother was Japanese, my father was from Texas, so then they get to understand that. But yeah, I was born in Japan, and about 3 years old, we moved to San Diego because my father was stationed at the amphibious base in Coronado where Navy SEALs train. And then during the Vietnam War, he would go to Vietnam, quite a few tours. And then when they went through divorce during the Vietnam War, my mother married my stepfather, who was a hospital corpsman. So when I was 15, we moved to Japan, and I lived at a naval air station, was bused to an Army high school.
Okay. And so when you were in high school, you joined the wrestling team.
I did. I played baseball, played football, and I was on the wrestling team. I was recruited because I was part of the junior varsity and the varsity football and baseball team, and they recruited me for wrestling, and that really impacted my life in so many ways because I had a Japanese coach named Nori Kiguchi, who's in the Wrestling Hall of Fame, and he is the inventor of MMA called Shuto, which is like a precursor to MMA. And so a lot of things I learned from him. He was the original Mr. Miyagi, I tell people, because he taught me a lot of principles in life and discipline in wrestling that really applied far into my life.
Now, so you were a teenager already when you moved to Japan. Was there a culture shock? I mean, what was that like? What did you experience and what did you notice right off the bat?
Absolutely. You know, growing up pretty much in San Diego area, being in a home kind of two cultures. I had the father who was born and raised in America, military. My mother who still had a broken English, Japanese, still had to take my shoes off coming into the house. That was a Japanese cultural thing. So I learned a lot of broken Japanese with my English, and I didn't really fully comprehend just how much that culture was going to impact me and the principles that I learned from my mom and then later learned from other relatives and being in Japan. And so we went to Japan, and growing up, you know, in elementary school and junior high in San Diego area, I remember people would ask me, are you Chinese, Japanese, Hispanic, what are you? So when we were getting stationed in Japan, I thought, for sure, my relatives in Japan will recognize I'm part Asian, I'm part Japanese. I get there, and even my own relatives said, you look like a gaijin, which means foreigner. I said, I don't fit anywhere. I'm gonna have to start my own country somewhere. And then I discovered a place where everybody looks like me, Hawaii. So I love to suffer and go over there and just hang out in Hawaii. But seriously, you know, when I went to Japan, it was a culture shock in some regard, but I think I was prepared because of the culture that my mom brought up with me in growing up in America, but at the same time, still having some of that culture and appreciation for her heritage. So being in Japan, the advantage for me was I went to a military school, so it was a lot of crossing of denominational and racial lines, and there was a lot of people I got to meet from around the world, black and white and brown and yellow, so many together in a hodgepodge, and I really think formulated a lot of who I am today by interfacing with people from all different ethnic backgrounds and different backgrounds growing up. So I think by putting us together, it gave me an appreciation for the diversity of cultures, ethnicities, but also it caused me to really appreciate the land that, as a citizen, the United States citizen, what that meant to me and the advantage I had as I travel the world today as an ambassador in really so many ways in leadership, disaster relief, you know, prayer initiatives and the things I'm involved in, I think really were formulated during those growing up years, but also going to school in Japan.
Yeah. I mean, in the Western world, we always think about Japan and we have this idea of samurais and ninjas and kamikaze pilots. How true is that in the culture? How prevalent is it to have that kind of mindset growing up in Japan?
Well, that's a great question. And I think I've learned to appreciate it even more in my older years. And the principles I've learned, for example, even in wrestling, I ended up becoming first Japan, second all Far East in my weight class in the Kanto Plains High School system throughout the Far East, and my coach, Nori Kiguchi. And I remember he taught me some principles, and there's a word that he taught me called Gambatte Yo. And Gambatte Yo means you got this, go for it. And I've learned that in wrestling, that you don't necessarily learn from always being aggressive, you learn from how to use your opponent's strength. And he taught me a lot of principles like that. So when other people were doing a lot of weight training, he wouldn't allow me to do that. He wanted me to do calisthenics, push-ups, sit-ups, jogging, running, and do all these agility exercises. But then he really taught me a lot of mental strength, and that whenever you feel like you're about to lose, think of this word, gambatte, you've got this. That you're about to be pinned on your back, but that's out of that, you draw from that strength of all the training and the agility that you learn, and know that you have another moment here you can actually get out of this. And so because of that, I'd be on the mat about to lose, and I'd be hearing his voice, gambatte yo, gambatte yo. And one time during the Far East Wrestling Championships in 1974, which ages me, I was first seed in 2 different weight classes. And I remember the first day of the Far East Wrestling Championships in Yokosuka, Japan, I fractured my left elbow. It was swollen, it was in pain. And that night they put a bandage on my arm, iced it throughout the night. And the next day, Sensei said to me, Doug-san, are you sure you want to continue? I only thought about it for a moment. I said, Sensei, I've come too far to quit now. In other words, I've trained too hard to quit now. And that Mr. Miyagi moment, before Mr. Miyagi, he took the bandage off of my left arm and put it on my good arm. I said, Sensei, what are you doing? Kiguchi-san, what are you doing? He said, Doug-san, everybody know you were injured yesterday, but they will not remember which arm. And sure enough, when I got on the mat, they all went for the arm with the bandage to get an advantage on me. And with all the pain, I still ended up taking first Japan, second all Far East. I only lost the gold medal by 1 or 2 seconds throughout, points throughout that whole match. Disappointing, but yet that became a life message. So even when I went through stage 4 B-cell lymphoma cancer in 2015, that came back to me, that I couldn't just sit back and be pinned in life. I had to take that position to get beyond my moment of challenge. It became, in fact, we had a t-shirt that said, your desire to win must be greater than your moments of challenge. That moment of pain and challenge when I was wrestling, I had to overcome because my desire to win was greater than that moment.
That's really cool. I just keep thinking about the fact that you're from a military family and you lived in Japan. The discipline, in the culture of Japan, but also the military. I mean, how that affect you as you're developing into manhood?
And let me, I think that's a great point, because if you think about a lot of what we learn, we don't realize we've learned till we get older. There's a lot of foundational principles of growing up that I didn't appreciate. And it wasn't until 1990, January 2nd, 1990, that I was invited by a group of 17 Vietnam veterans who had survivor's guilt to go to Vietnam and to kind of go as a chaplain. I never fully appreciated all that my dad and my stepdad had given in giving to they were lifers in the military. I didn't fully appreciate. I only saw the alcohol, I saw the frustrations, I saw sometimes going inward because of all they had seen during the war. And if you look at Veterans Memorial in Houston, the cemetery, my biological father's gravestone actually says World War II, Korean, and Vietnam War. He lied about his age to get in the tail end of World War II. So here's a guy who lived most of his whole life serving in the military and serving America in wars that I would have never truly understood. In fact, growing up, he never talked a lot about it. Whereas today, people all want to write about it, talk about it, get accolades for it, pats on the back. That generation, it was an honor to serve their country. And so I didn't fully appreciate what they did. I only saw the negative things, that they were never home, absentee fathers, tried to be good fathers when they were home, but I only saw the absenteeism and the alcoholism. And only when I went to Vietnam in 1990 with these Vietnam veterans, heard their stories as we're landing in Vietnam and saw their tears, saw the feelings that they were going through and their emotions, and began to hear their stories, then I began to get a revelation of what great champions and heroes my dad and stepfather really were. But I didn't fully appreciate that till after they were gone. They died of military-related cancers, which many people don't realize what families go through with military or law enforcement. The whole family lives through that. And so I didn't really fully understand that, but I realized these truly were heroes and champions in my life that emulated something greater than what I would have thought a man should be. But now I realize what real men are to serve country, to serve their families, to be willing to do whatever it takes to make those sacrifices for other people's lives to succeed.
That's deep. You know, you talked about the military side. Talk about the culture of Japan and the essence and idea of what masculinity is in that culture.
Sure. You know, like in any culture, you know, I'm married to a Latina. She was born and raised in Texas, but her family's originally from Monterrey, Mexico, immigrated here decades ago. And so there's this whole Latin thing on machismo. And in Japanese culture, there is a form of that. It's kind of like man's culture and this whole place of the honor code. But if you go deeper than that and look back at the 14th, 15th, 16th century and the samurai, as I began to study that, the Bushido code, or the way of the warrior, are certain virtues that have moved into the whole culture of Japan today, especially in the area of manhood. Honor is a major virtue. The willingness to serve. There is a word called in Japanese culture for husband, which is shujin-san, which is to say, my lord. But it doesn't mean like lord, like you're lording over me, but a man who truly is able to show honor and to be there for his family receives this name called shujin-san because you deserve the place of being honored. So in the virtues of the Bushido code, of the way of the warrior, all these virtues I found later in life again were actually introduced with biblical virtues. In fact, there's whole tribes of Japanese samurai that were Christians and who become Christians. There was moves of God in the 14th, 15th, 16th century that kind of got swept under because of the, there was bloodshed, there was martyrs, Christian martyrs, but there was an honor code by biblical virtues that were incorporated into what today we call the Bushido code, or the way of the warrior, or the samurai code, which I think has a big influence by the Christian culture through those tribes that were Christian tribes of samurai.
I read somewhere that samurai means servant.
Yes, that's right.
Like they serve the emperor.
That's right.
Is that correct? Yeah, okay.
Yep, so their original calling was to be there to show honor and to serve and to sacrifice on behalf of the emperor, or the sacrifice on behalf of their lords that were over them that they served. And so it was a very difficult place for the Japanese Christian samurai when they were told they had to acquiesce their faith in Christ. And so I think in that process, though, they were able to incorporate that we can actually serve better by living out biblical virtues.
It almost denotes the idea of servant leadership. Like you have, or people misunderstand the word meek, which really, I heard the definition is power under control.
Yes.
I mean, would a samurai embody the idea of meekness?
And disciplines, an element of mercy and compassion, and even respect for those who they considered enemies. When you think, I watched that movie years ago called The Last Samurai, and I thought, how in the world can Tom Cruise do a movie on the samurai? I mean, I was almost like, I'm not going to go watch it. But when I watched it, my wife noticed I was getting teary-eyed because there were so many things I learned in the culture that really were authentically in that film, and especially even the respect that people have for their enemies. If an enemy shows a certain code of honor, then you show them great respect and honor even in your strong disagreement. We need that in our culture today. We have such lack of civility in our public discourse. We need some of that code to say we can still show respect to those we strongly disagree with, but we cannot show honor to those who show no respect or do not walk in characteristics of that honor code.
Yeah. Well, I mean, clearly it impacted you you have an organization that uh, sends relief efforts all over the world.
Mhm.
So you're kind of embodying everything that you were influenced by in that way, wouldn't you say?
I believe so. I think a lot of it was, uh, I believe that our lives are defined by the relationships that we have and our experiences. And so I think my growing up as a military brat, going to high school in Japan, at an American school, but being around a lot of Japanese and people from other cultures in the Philippines, from Korea, from America, from all over Europe. As we gather together in this hodgepodge, I learned a lot of principles, and of course in wrestling and baseball and football, principles I live out today. But I think part of what I do does come from that place of I help a lot of people that have used me or slandered me. So my point of helping people is not based on if they like me or not. It's on doing the right thing and the proper characteristics of what I believe are strong, and even my biblical values that I feel like are important. So I can still appreciate and love people who may not like me. I don't have to respond with the same spirit of hatred. I can respond with an opposite spirit. We in our society we have a compensatory facade. We compensate on the outside for the hurts or the insecurities or experiences on the inside. If we can look through the windows of the soul and realize what you see on the outside, the external expression of alcoholism or drug addiction or anger, those are external expressions of something deeper on the inside. If we can get past what we see, begin to penetrate the heart, we can bring a message of hope to people that maybe normally don't even realize that you have that message. So what we do through our compassion outreach is I started in 1981 when I had an epiphany in my own life, and being in the fitness business at the time, I began to reach out to people that didn't have what I had. I began to see the homeless. I began to see at-risk youth or gang members. I began to see single-parent moms in need. And we just began to try to reach out the best we could in a practical way that actually opened an avenue, a platform by which we could begin to help people beyond their circumstances. So it wasn't just a hand out, it did become the proverbial a hand up. And to watch people grow from that. In fact, today, I remember one business guy was a homeless, bankrupt businessman that I took in, didn't have any space, got 17 people in our apartment and 6 in another apartment and 12 in a house that was given to me. I'm thinking this is what we're all supposed to do, right? But I remember a guy was bankrupt businessman who lost everything. I gave him a bean bag. Remember the old bean bags?
Yeah.
He stayed on that with a blanket. And today, he ended up becoming the president of an oil-related company and began to become very successful, a father, a husband. And I hear as a guy himself whose father was killed when he was a boy, and he grew up with such anger that he wanted to kill the man that killed his father.
Yeah.
But instead, he began to find principles of what I call the principles of the kingdom, or biblical principles that changed who he was, and now he's become a father, a husband, a successful businessman. Another guy that I'll be seeing here again soon, it was on my board. He was a drug addict, dropped out of college, and ended up on the streets. I was able to reach out to him because one of his family members said, would you help him? And then he later went on to a drug rehab that I connected him to. When he came back, walked him through the process, he ended up becoming a very successful millionaire in a family-owned business that he was able to sell. And now his kids have all grown up, never seen him on drugs or alcohol and partying. They only saw the dad that was there for them, that he felt like in his own life he was lacking. And so, we can see, of course, there's a lot of heartbreak too. But if we make ourselves available, and we may not always be qualified, but make ourselves available as men, I believe that we can help give an environment for others to grow and to be nurtured and to be successful.
Absolutely. How important is it to, putting in the hard work?
Well, I think a lot of people today don't realize that hard work does pay off. In my father's generation, in the older generation, we learned that if you walk in proper character and hard work, you can do anything. And my mother taught me this one time. We were in Green Bay, Wisconsin for a couple of years when I was growing up. And I remember, a lot of people still had issues because of the Korean War and then, of course, World War II in Japan. And they would call her names and things. But she taught me even then, because she was so proud to be an American. She was so proud. And she said, she goes, Douglas. People call me Douglas because she couldn't say my name right. She said, Douglas. So she would say, Doug, don't let other people's issues keep you from being who you need to be. If we retain those issues, or we retain the hatred or the bitterness of others, we become like that. And we get stuck in those moments. But if we release out of our hearts the things that have been done against us, and we begin to look to something, a future of hope and a vision of hope and direction, then we can overcome anything. So I learned at an early age from my own Japanese little mother, 4'11", who I was always afraid of even as I got bigger than her, that Mama was right. If I could learn not to stay in a moment of hurt or pain or frustration or someone else's issues, I can overcome anything and be what I'm supposed to be.
It's really tied into identity as well.
It really
how
is.
you see yourself.
Absolutely. Well, we have an identity crisis today. As you know, some of the books I've written, I've talked about, Leadership Awakening or Hope for a Fatherless Generation or In Search of a Father's Blessing. We have a whole generation or generations looking for that father's blessing. And so I think for me, that was part of my long-term journey, was looking for that place of a connection to an earthly father. But instead, I ended up finding that place of relationship with a heavenly father. I saw the other day Sheila Walsh. And I remember the 1980s when she was a famous singer and that she was a co-host on a national or international Christian television program. She was interviewing me about my story and what I came from and what I was doing. She goes, you came to Houston, Texas looking for your biological father, but instead you had an epiphany and your heavenly father found you. I saw her the other day and said, that was a landmark moment for me when I realized how true that was, how revelatory that was for me. And so a part of my life today is to help other people find connection. They may not have a good relationship with an earthly father, but that doesn't mean that they can understand the love of a heavenly father. And if we can become those surrogate parents or fathers for this next generation, it doesn't matter what their past has been. We can't change our past, but the choices we make every day determine our future. If we make ourselves available for others and to help this next generation find that connection of identity, there's nothing that can stop us from the future for this generation.
Absolutely. Would you say there's a crisis today? I mean, we're talking about many decades of your experience. What do you see as being one of the biggest issues today? And you're talking about fathers. I mean, our culture has spent a lot of time and effort to tear down that role in society. Can you talk on that?
Absolutely. There's different people's thoughts of what it means to be a man. I'm not talking about the man in the worldly sense. This I'm a man. You have to be serve me. I'm talking about. And now here's what I've said. I said this at a national gathering in the old Astrodome back after 9/11 to a gathering of thousands of women. And I said that a man who is secure in his own identity is not intimidated by the gifts of women, but celebrate them. And what I mean by that is that if you're not intimidated by others, you realize that you're a strength giver. Men, we're called, if we're secure in who we are to be strength givers to our families, to our children, to those around us. A coach is a strength giver to his team. I think it's important in this culture today, when there's such an emasculation of godly men, that we need to get back to the place of being secure in who we are in the Lord, so that we can walk in that way of the warrior. We can walk as Isaiah chapter 9 says, as Gabors, as champions or heroes for our families, for others to emulate, because the characteristics of the kingdom emanate from the character of the king. That's true of the Lord in our lives, but also in our homes. If we would truly lead by example, others would want to follow because they trust our leadership.
Speaking of identity, I've been reading a book called Chop Wood, Carry Water. And it's about an American who so loved the Japanese culture and specifically wanted to be a samurai that he moved when he was of age to Japan and came under a mentorship of a sensei to learn how to be a samurai. And he kept wanting so desperately to be the samurai, but not put in the work that came with it. And hence the name of the book, Chop Wood, Carry Water. So for the first year, that's all the sensei had him do, which was mind-boggling to him. He thought, what is this? How is this helping me? But when the first day out, he realized even the older guys were outworking him. Like he wasn't even conditioned to do that. And over time, he was able to get to that place where he was keeping up with everyone else. But it still took a long time to do this particular discipline. And his identity wanted to be immediately samurai without doing the work. And one of the things that the sensei had told him, and I'll just read it because it impacted me, he talked about understanding what your value is. You know, your value isn't in your identity as a samurai. He said, value comes from who we are, not what we do. You're more than a parent, a CEO, a coach, a plumber. Your identity isn't what you do, but who you are. Your value is constant, differing from identity. Your value is constant. Your identity can change. Don't find identity in something that can't be, or don't find identity in something that can be gone in an instant. Find it, in something that lasts. And you mentioned this, today's youth not having identity, and I think you have to have identity to really have purpose. If you don't know who you are, then how are you going to know what you're to do? And we're seeing a lot of confusion in these kids, even with gender issues. Very confused because they clearly don't have their identity based in anything outside of, whatever they're, learning from social media or other sources, even in school. And I think it speaks to largely to what you're talking about, the role of fatherhood and the importance of that in our culture today.
Yep. You brought up some great points earlier too, and I want to kind of tie that into what you're saying, because it is about discipline. I'll be 68 here this year.
Well, you don't look it.
And I have a guy that's been on ESPN. He's a medical doctor for men and sports medicine, and he said there is no way. He goes, I work with guys in their 20s and 30s that are not as fit as you are. Well, it's not because I just decide one day I want to get fit. It has to be discipline of consistency. It's sleep well, take time well, learn to work, play, and have leisure. You have to balance those things out. But we have to work hard too if we're going to play hard. At the same time, I think the discipline, when I think about even in my own life, I didn't know how to be a good father or a good husband. I didn't feel like I had those kinds of role models, although later in life I realized what role models they really were, or my coach. But I realized it was more about being available and being obedient. Much of what I do is not because I'm mostly qualified or I'm the most articulate, the most oratorically gifted communicator, the best writer, the best compassion outreach organization. I just make myself available every day and realize that it takes a simple discipline of obedience to walk into those moments. So things that I've been able to be a part of in the last 4+ decades, all over the world in multiple nations, people go, how did you end up with the president of that Muslim country? How'd you end up with Chuck Norris? Or how did you end up with this person? Or they begin to name, how'd you do that? I go, I think I'm just the Asian Forrest Gump. I just made myself available and showed up in the picture. It's not because I'm the most qualified. I'm just the most available. And that in those moments you step into, see, heroes are not those who are born heroes or born champions. They step into moments. I think every boy, every young girl dreams of grandiose things one day, but then life happens, pain happens, situations happen, and they're stuck in those moments. But if we realize that every one of us have an opportunity to get past those moments, step into the moments that are given to us, that we can see everything change. We can't change our past, but the decisions we make every day determine our future.
And do the work. You have to do the work.
You have to do the work. And so when I go to the gym, I may not feel like it, but if I go to the gym for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, just do a little bit, it gets me moving.
Yeah.
And it gets that discipline, those old juices coming, but it has to be consistency of discipline, be it mentally, spiritually, financially, relationally, however it is. We need to make sure that we are disciplined enough to step into what we may be uncomfortable with.
Yeah. Do you know the name Ingvar Kamprad?
Who?
Ingvard Kamprad.
Mm.
If I'm probably butchering the name. Um, so true story. This boy in Switzerland or Sweden, I believe. He was in Sweden. He rode his bike around town, and he would sell his neighbors a single match. And he got made fun of a lot, like because his friends, all the other boys, like come play, and he's like, no, I'm selling matches, and he would go around door to door, selling individual matches, and then he would ride his bike 3 hours back into, I believe, Stockholm, and then he would buy more matches and ride back for 3 hours and then sell those matches, and he did that for years, and then he eventually started going door to door selling other products. But he was doing the work when everybody else was playing. And he is the founder of IKEA.
Come on, that's awesome.
Everybody wants to be the founder of IKEA, but not everybody's willing to go sell matchsticks door to door.
You know, there's a biblical principle that says, as you're, let me give it a summary, as you're willing to serve others, that which is yours will be developed. Or there is even a biblical saying that as you serve which is another's, then you'll be a good steward of what is given to you. So I think there's a principle in life that as we give, you know, you go to a restaurant, you give a good tip because of good service. So money follows ministry. Appreciation reciprocates with people then who show respect to you. Appreciation versus depreciation. If we appreciate others, and even if we disagree with them, they reciprocate by showing some element of respect back to you. I've had some of my greatest adversaries over the years become my greatest advocates. Not because they agreed with me initially, but because they saw consistency of certain characteristics that they were admirable to them. So to me, it's like the way of the warrior, the Bushido code, the samurai code, the biblical codes that I've tried to live by, the virtues. And I'm not perfect at. But as we live out those in consistency and as a discipline spiritually, mentally, physically, then others begin to see something about us, not just in our words, but in who we are. You said that earlier. It's not so much what you do, but who you are.
Yeah.
And I really believe that's important, that we understand that what we do is not who we are. It's something deeper than that, because then we have a well to draw from that outlasts the things that we do.
We're talking about manhood, we're talking about masculinity, we're talking about fatherhood, but every man's not the same. We all have different character traits. We all have different desires and interests. What I like to pursue isn't what everybody likes to pursue as a man, so it's not a one-size-fits-all. For you, define what a man is.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a big one. I think that each of us in life first have to be secure in who we are, and that we're not trying to project our idea of what a man is to others, but as men we make ourselves available. I didn't think I'd ever be a good husband or a good father, because that was something in my mind. Well, I didn't know how to emulate that. But as I made myself available, I created an environment of security for my wife and my daughter, by which now they flourish. I've done the same thing for other people around the world, that they didn't have the same advantages that maybe I did or others, but I created an environment of security for them that made them feel like they were important to God, important to other people, and it wasn't based on their giftings, it wasn't based on what they could do, but based on who they were, as you said earlier. I think it's important for as a man, and a biblical manhood, I believe, that to be a gentleman you have to first let something in you change. What is being a gentleman? Is it because we open a door? That's the outward expression of something inward. It has to be part of who we are. I remember the late Ben Kinchlow said, as he was endorsing a book on Maximized Manhood by the late Dr. Edwin Lewis Cole, and he and Dr. Cole used to really promote this saying, that being born a male is a matter of birth, but being a man is a matter of choice. Life is full of choices. The choices I make every day determine my future. I choose out of this characteristic in me to want to be able to love my wife, to love my daughter, to love those around me, even those who disagree with me. Love, again, is not about a feeling, it's about a decision and a choice and a discipline to show appreciation and respect to others, even if they strongly oppose us. Now, in my older years, do I go fishing as much as I used to? No. Do I go hunting? No. Those are things I did when I was younger. My greatest passion today is to travel the world and to help people see through a tangible expression of God's loving compassion and mercy outreaches that they too can find hope in their despair. During the Asian economic collapse in Indonesia in 1998, to go there in the midst of over half their population went below the poverty line. Or go to Japan after the tsunami that was there a few years ago. And that opened up a whole new avenue as I spoke to leaders of their government, to speak to provincial leaders, to speak to people in communities, to speak to their medical president and vice president of the medical association. Why are you doing this? I said, well, there's millions of people around the world that are brokenhearted of what's happening to you right now. And as I began to talk to them, I said, would you mind if on behalf of millions of people around the world, and I applied the Bushido Code through the biblical, I said, we have virtues as a Christian, because I'm a Christian, there are virtues that actually correlate with your Asian codes or your Bushido codes, the ways of the warrior. Would you mind if I pray some of those cultural virtues that are, to me, biblical virtues? Not one said no. And it opened up so much conversation for them to receive in their heart, to open their mind to receive the messenger. So for me, being a man today is not so much going out fishing and hunting and doing all the things that we like to do as men. Others find that they would to give their time to doing compassion outreaches or going out and doing things with the family or doing things in public that help other men to find that they can be secure in who they are. So I think it has different characteristics for different people. It's not based on this is a man. A man is not just, again, what we do. A man is about the characteristics of allowing ourselves to let God in Christ-likeness in me be emulated to others around me. Now, they may not have to be a Christian, but they can see something about me that's different. So if it's in Vietnam with underground leaders there, or if it's on the border of Iran meeting with underground leaders there, or if it's in Indonesia or Malaysia, or if it's in Africa or Uganda or Nigeria, Botswana, wherever it might be, I just want to be there as an ambassador and to let them see that what I'm talking about is not just because I'm a good speaker or because I've written some books. I want them to see there's something about me that's different that can communicate with them even if they might disagree with me. If we allow ourselves to be available, then we as a man can help be those who are an example to others, because others need to see something authentic in us that gives them an environment of security for them to be able to trust us and to be able to move into that place of security and fulfillment of the destiny of their own lives.
Doug, thank you so much for spending time with us today and sharing your insights and wisdom. Vintage Gentlemen is about helping men become better men and building a community of people who can come together with different gifts and talents, different backgrounds, and different skill sets, and sharing them with the community so that we can all ascribe and aspire to be better. And I think this will be one of those moments that people learn from and glean from what you've said today, and we apply it to our lives and learn to be more than just fishing and hunting and, you know, for me, riding motorcycles and shooting guns, but to learn the aspect of compassion. And that's something that I've been thinking a lot about lately. In my own life, I've had some wins, I've had losses, I've had some high times, I've had very low times. And over the last 8 years, I had gone through some pretty dark moments, but in that have recognized something that a character trait that I don't know if I had previously, and that was empathy. And I think that only could come through experience. You know, it's easy to put ourselves up on a pedestal and look down at people, or when we don't have experience in something, think that we have the answers. But until you're challenged sometimes with what you think you believe, you don't always know what you believe. And on the backside of that, have really experienced a fruit, if you will, of empathy and thinking about how that can impact others as they move forward in their lives, to be there when others are low, to celebrate when they're going through great times, but to be an ear when they're going through the bad times.
Duane, I have to say, if you don't mind, this about the opportunities I've had to get to know you and to find out more about what you do. But I've seen the authenticity and what you said, the empathy part. But also, I think sometimes there's a wellness we don't realize is there till we go through adversity. But every adversity has become an opportunity. And many people don't know how to get past that moment, that dark moment, that adversity. And the reality is that people need to see that vulnerability, see the authenticity in our lives, that whatever crucibles of experience we go, whatever journeys we go through, there is life beyond that moment. Mm-hmm. That there is hope beyond that moment of crisis. And we've all been through them. Yeah. You know, I shared some of my own, and I think if we get past that moment of crisis, that adversity, that on the other side of that is so much more. And that others get to glean from us as we enter into that next part of our journey.
Well, especially as guys, we know we're raised to, we don't cry, we're strong, and we can get through this and power through and work hard, like all the catchphrases. And there's truth to a lot of that.
Sure.
But sometimes it doesn't allow us to be soft, but in the right ways, like pliable is what I mean, teachable. We don't always know the best route, and it's okay.
That's right. In one of my books, I wrote about being fat. Faithful. I want to be faithful to God, to my wife, and to my friendships, and to what I'm supposed to do. Available, because a lot of it's just being available, isn't it? And you said it a moment ago, and teachable. F-A-T. I want to be fat. I want to be faithful, available, and teachable. If I no longer am teachable, I actually acquiesce and abdicate my place of influence, because everybody who's going to aspire to lead in any capacity must always be a lifelong learner, and I hope I stay that way.
Well, I'm on that journey. As I say so many times, I don't claim to be the vintage gentleman, but I'm on a journey to become one, and I'm inviting you to come along with me, so I appreciate you coming along today.
Thanks, Duane. I want to be one of them vintage gentlemen, too.
You are one. That's why you're here. I appreciate it.
Thank you, bro.